Hi, this is Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan, and I am going to read to you tonight from my book, I Trusted You, fully and honestly speaking of gendered assault. I am going to be reading the concluding chapter called Raising the Future, and it begins on page 215. I am a survivor. Some of the narratives included in this volume are my own. Some of those who have perpetrated against me have been male. With lesser frequency, some have also been female. I undertook this work as a female with a long history of good interactions with both men and women who have overwhelmingly meant me well. I have warm, loving memories of my great-grandfather, grandfather, and father, all of whom respected the females in their lives, including my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and me, and warm, loving memories of the women in my family tree who also lived lives of respect and did no one intentional harm. I have good memories of decades of interaction with 7 living brothers and 4 sisters, and I still mourn the loss of the brother who passed before his time, my twin. I'm married and have many happy memories of the 24 years I spent with my husband, with whom, even though we are now divorced, I have an amicable fraternal relationship and with whom I continue to co-parent our now grown daughters. I know the devastation of being the mother of a deeply grieved son who passed at birth. I have nephews I admire and respect, and I am in love, head over heels, and indubitably with the 2 sweetest twin grandsons ever born into the earth. On a less familial note, I have many male colleagues, students, and clients whom I also respect and admire, though there is no part of me that underappreciates males. As a human being, situated in a given place and time, and as a US citizen in the early 21st century, I have a vested interest in the well-being of males in our society, in their freedom to revel in the best of human experience, and their ability to live with autonomy and dignity, or as Jean Kilbourne says, to live authentic and freely chosen lives. As a woman located in the same time and space, I have a vested interest in my own and other women's ability to also live authentic and freely chosen lives. I began this work with the social science fact that we know incontrovertibly that there have been times and places where human beings did not, neither male nor female, exalt violence, and where men and boys did not dominate, harm, rape, beat, or subjugate women or girls, or vice versa. There's an anthropological evidence early in the book. A serious problem for men is that masculinity is often linked with violence, with brutality, with ruthlessness, and boys grow up in a world in which men are constantly shown as perpetrators of violence, as brutal. They grow up in a world in which they are encouraged to be tough and insensitive. That was a quote from Jean Kilbourne. And she made a number of videos called Killing Me Softly. That fact alone, which you can find on YouTube, that fact alone, that not all societies have been rape prone and that some societies have even been rape free, indicates that, as I contend, rape and partner violence do not spring from, or only or even primarily, the individual psychopathy of the individual rapist, but from the sociopathy of a culture as a whole. I also indicate that we do and can affect the ways in which our societies do gender. One of the things I appreciate about having grown up in my household is having had the opportunity to watch my father model a broader range of masculinity than I often presently observe within families. My father played sports in high school and college, football and basketball, and the turkey bowl in the side yard every Thanksgiving. If one of his children were interested in a sport, he encouraged them. However, to quote one of my father's former patients, in real ways, my father was a Renaissance man, in that he emphasized, along with hard work and accomplishment, education, science, religion, philosophy, and the arts. Whenever a classic or educational movie came on, he insisted that all of his children stop whatever they were doing and come and watch and learn. Along with our mother, he filled our lives with the sound of music. For us, he bought and played recordings of great pieces. From early grade school on, along with our mother and himself, he had us in adult choir, and he paid for music lessons for all. And he filled our home with books, installing built-in bookcases in every dining room and family room we owned, and filling the shelves with a wide range of literature and education, as wide a range of literature and educational materials as he could buy. and he induced us to use them. If in that house you ever dared utter the words, "I'm bored," you were told to go read. Through the years, friends often commented on how, whenever anyone asked a question, my father would start the train to the bookshelves in pursuit of the answer, pulling off volume after volume in ever-deepening spirals of the encyclopedia he had purchased when the first of us entered grade school, until nearly half the set had to be put back. He took us to the theater and to the opera, often and regularly. By the time his medical practice began to be truly established, he had joined, along with our mother and a changing assortment of their children, local productions of musical theater, and we were induced to learn the music and script too, even when we didn't have a part in the play because he needed help rehearsing. All of this modeled a cultured masculinity, which is not to say that my father was not a gendered man or a man of his time or a religious man with an ideology about the place of women, but it is to say that he was not a narrow man in terms of the interests he let himself and his sons pursue. He did not limit his masculinity to our mainstream model of violence and anger and broken communication skills. If my brothers, as heirs of his masculinity, can do anything, it's talk and sing and appreciate the greats and the greatness of theater and literature and history and science. Another quote from Jean Kilbourne. And certainly boys get the message early on that talking, communicating is seen as weakness in men. The truth is, if you're a man who wants an intimate relationship with a woman, and most men do, you better be the one she tells her deep, dark secrets to, because it's impossible to have an intimate relationship, a successful one, without being vulnerable, without communicating. The question before us, this is me again, is how then should we bring up boys that we may reduce the ubiquity of violence, including violence against women and girls, in our culture? That question must also be asked globally by those in other cultures about their own societies. Concurrently, we need to ask, how should we bring up girls so that they too first pursue authentic and freely chosen lives for themselves, and second, desire broadly cultured and authentic partners? From the cultural trappings attached to wedding ceremonies to the ideology that primarily mothers cook and do laundry after a hard day at the office while fathers watch television, to the storylines in books, television, and movies, males, alas, are still continually fed the message that they are superior to females, served and pursued by females, and that one day, no matter how base or how vile, each male may expect to have a female as individual woman, servant, lover of his own to attend to his domestic and sexual needs. And that was actually an idea from John Stuart Mill. And these males are raised in our society in our time and day to be violent, or at least to exalt and admire violence. As masculinity scholars point out, violence has become normative masculinity. This is unacceptable. It is the source of great harm, great pain, unnecessary harm, and unnecessary pain. In both the first and second wave of women's work for fairness and equity, activists set about responding to the problems of partner violence. Women have spent almost a century and a half exposing wife abuse and with insistence and accuracy, and decades organizing shelters and escape routes and changing law enforcement practices so that increasingly woman beating is recognized as a violent crime. However, there has been no serious change in the central problem, male and often female belief in male privilege or male right of rule. Today's youth achieve majority in an era in which media and the youth subculture promote a highly sexist standard of distinctly different complementary sexual roles. While young women expect to pay the traditional male sex role, and more young men expect them to work and to benefit by their incomes, the same young women, by and large, still carry a larger share of the burden of housework and childcare, the traditional female sex role, sometimes prompting a nostalgia for oppressions gone by. Yet, returning to a life limited by the cloister and the financial dependence and servitude of the home is not actually the balance that would rectify this inequality and make life, home and work life, more fulfilling. 3/4 of women with children under age 18 now work for pay outside the home, as do 2/3 of women with children under age 3. 73% work full-time. Yet, among heterosexual married couples, the male partner factually carries the burden of housework, child rearing, and daycare responsibilities less than the female partner. Full-time working moms with preschool kids put in at least an extra 5 to 7 hours a week or an extra 2 weeks a year of 24-hour days doing childcare and housework. Because of this ongoing unequal distribution of necessary domestic care work between procreative partners, young women still stunt their career advancement, making career decisions based on their perception of juggling a given career with childcare. Also, there is ongoing backlash leading to ongoing gender role confusion. Through the power of mass television evangelism, the conservative movement has more adherents now than before the 1980s. This movement, with its spillover ideology from the religious right, calls for female submission, an end to female access to contraception, and a return to God-ordained complementary gender roles. And there were air quotes around God-ordained and complementary. Either through internalization of its ideology or through a nostalgia for a supposed past in which times were simpler and women knew their place, some men still express gender role expectations for their wives in terms as regressive as those expounded before the changes of the 1970s, and some women express those same role expectations as well for themselves and for their men. Even as racism is passed down from generation to generation by ideology, by belief systems that espouse the superiority of the one over the inferiority of the other, so the patriarchal demand for male supremacy in intimate relations is passed down, passed on, and passed over by an ideology, by a belief. In order to oppress or harm another, one must see them as essentially different. If you see yourself or your group as the prototype for human, as the right, air quotes, right religion, ethnicity, race, gender, etc., and the other as qualitatively different than you, then by extension that other may be less than you or yours. This is the foundation of the ability to oppress or do harm. This emphasizing of difference over similarity, and it has shaped the history of imperialism and conquest for centuries. It has also shaped the history of gender relations in Western culture for millennia. It is ideological. Men who believe in their own supremacy do not see women as being as fully human as they are themselves, and hence have few pangs of conscience for treating differently those who may perceive to be quite different. Yet, different but equal can be no more equal than separate but equal. When you know that I am essentially the same, that I, as the other, feel like you, as the prototypical human feel, think like you think, and will hurt like you would hurt, that your action, because I too am fully human, will affect me as it would affect you, you will stop yourself from doing me intentional or callous harm. To be rid of woman battering and sexual assault, more than shelters are necessary, those shelters are helpful. More than laws are necessary. More than good treatment at the hands of criminal justice systems is necessary. It is necessary to have more than police who arrest, prosecutors who prosecute, and judges who exercise equal justice. What is needed is a new way of thinking in family life, in media, in entertainment, in religion, in parenting, in every segment and strata of society. Little boys need to be raised experientially learning the equality of their sisters. Little girls need to share privilege in equal measure with little boys. Individuals of all sexes and genders need to be given all the tools and encouragement needed to help them develop their full human potential. They need to grow up loved and directed and protected from all forms of abuse. All sexes and genders need to learn and share the full set of responsibilities, including household chores. One cannot honestly love that which one does not respect and consider to be truly, fully equal to oneself. Once they believe in the human rights and the equality of the women they have sex with, men will not use their fists in a free expression of temper that aims to enforce obedience or acquiescence, because they will no longer desire the acquiescence or the subservience of the recognizably fully human women they claim to love. Another quote from Jean Kilbourne. We are trapped in very rigid roles and in very crippling definitions of femininity and masculinity. In general, human qualities, qualities that we all share, that we all need, are divided up, polarized, and labeled masculine and feminine, and then the feminine is consistently devalued, which causes women to devalue ourselves and each other, and men to devalue not only women, but also all those qualities that get labeled feminine, air quote, by the cultures. And by that I mean qualities like compassion, cooperation, nurturance, empathy, intuition, sensitivity. We may give lip service to these qualities, but in fact, they have very low priority in our society. And we all lose, and we lose very badly, when we're told that one gender can have only one set of human qualities and one gender only the other. And men are still very rigidly socialized to repress these human qualities in themselves at enormous cost to all of us. We obviously end up being half or less of what we otherwise might be, and certainly this dehumanizes all of us, men as well as women. The end of that Jean Kilbourne quote. At this writing, my twin grandsons still display a full range of human emotions. It is quite evident that despite being born unambiguously male, they experience and express emotions like joy and excitement and delight and curiosity and sadness, yes, and anger. And along with the human qualities designated as, air quotes, masculine, they also possess those human qualities Kilbourne notes are disparaged as, air quotes, feminine: compassion, cooperation, nurturance, empathy, intuition, and sensitivity. Were they in future to feel and acquiesce to the social constraint to repress these human qualities in themselves, it would not only be at the cost of their Didi's, or grandmother's, broken heart, it would be at the cost of their own detriment. They themselves would end up being half or less of what they already so obviously are, full human beings, with an inborn ability to experience the range of human emotional connectedness with this world and with those other human beings in it. It is imperative that we, you and I, find the way to raise boy and girl children to walk in the fullness of their human capacities for all things. Boys in their human capability for emotional connection, empathy, expression, and interdependence, and girls in their human capacity for excitement, action, exploration, adventure, courage, and independence. In order to hold on to, grow into, and express the fullness of our humanity, we all genders, need to be affirmed to that fullness. We have a society in which social and economic resources are stratified by gender, race, class, sexual orientation, able-bodiedness, and more. This social stratification is unjust. It is unfair. All must be educated to know that the one who benefits from the enrichment of social privilege did not earn it, and the one who suffers from the immiseration of social disprivilege did not deserve it. As they grow, children need to be taught about the power structure, about their individual location in that power structure, and about ways to improve, update, and change that power structure. The one born to privilege must be actively taught not to be prejudiced or discriminatory, lest he think it is to his credit that things come more easily to him, or that different things come to him, and he must be encouraged to work toward making a difference. Ensuring the equal distribution of resources and power should be the province of all in a democracy. Even so, boys need to be taught through example, experience, conversation, text, and film that daddy is not better than or even particularly all that different from mommy, that maleness is not better than femaleness, and that as a matter of biological and social fact, except reproductively, females and males are not even all that different, that the statistical distributions of abilities, interests, physical strength, height, intelligence, and qualities erroneously labeled male or female overlap. The distributions overlap. that we have more in common across gender than we do within gender. Boys need to grow up in homes where they see women being respected and where they see women respecting themselves. Instead of being taught to see women as physically and intellectually frail beings who need male help for subsistence, boys need to be taught to see women as full, equal human beings with an inborn right to fair and equal treatment and to full, equal opportunity. They need to grow up in homes where they see women being independent, not taking abuse, also not dishing it out, but respecting themselves enough to stand on their own 2 feet and to give and demand fair and equitable treatment in return. Women who will not stay where they are not respected. We must change ourselves and then the society around us. Where we cannot change the society, we must counter the culture and media messages that demean girls and reify rigid gender roles. We must make sure that boys growing up know and understand the basic humanity and similarity across gender of girls, and that girls know and understand the basic humanity and similarity across gender of boys, and their own basic humanity and similarity with boys. And culture-wide, we must get over our internalized homophobia, our society-wide fear of all things, air quotes, gay, or air quotes, different, or queer, or trans, or intersex. This fear is a form of sexism, in that more than being concerned with the gender of one's romantic, affectional, sexual partners, it is about the social policing of gender role presentation, and at its core, about any breakdown of the sex-gender line. It challenges the female-bodied person who presents as masculine because she has no right to power, and disparages the male-bodied person who presents as feminine, or air quotes, effeminate, because he has power and has no right to give power up, to prefer the presentation that is less respected, the traits erroneously gendered and labeled, air quotes, feminine. Privileged males must not give up or modify their privilege by appearing feminine or weak, and disprivileged females must not press into power by appearing masculine or strong. And in our culture, those who are transgender in mind and identity or intersex in body simply may not exist because they challenge the biology behind the rigid binary divide of gender role presentation. I'm saying that that's how our society has treated them, like they don't exist. We must nurture the full breadth of the humanity of our children, including the softness, gentleness, joy, artistic urges, and ability to nurture of males, and the daring, engagement, creativity, and desire to explore in girls. Whether straight or bi or gay or somewhere else along the continuum, sexual orientation is to be celebrated. In her coming out episode, the character Ellen, played by Ellen DeGeneres, pointed out, "You never see a cake that says, 'Good for you, you're gay.' That needs to change culture-wide. The oppressed must always take the helm of their own liberation. No group gives up privilege to the group that is disempowered, except the disempowered group empowers itself and then persistently and vocally demands equality. In order to give boys the homes, the families, the broad upbringing that will allow each of them to become fully all that they have the potential to be, in order to make this generational shift in how men see and treat women, the women of this and each generation must shift how they see themselves and how they allow themselves to be treated. Women must again be educated to come to consciousness." As stated in 1848 in the Declaration of Sentiments, ratified and passed at the First Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, resolved, women ought to be enlightened so that they may no longer publish their degradation by declaring themselves satisfied with their present position, nor their ignorance by asserting that they have all the rights they want. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Women today, like the women of prior generations, must demand the change they need. We must demand mutually respectful relationships with a truly equitable division of labor within each relationship. When we work for pay outside the home, we must demand that our partners share the burden of domestic and childcare work. When we choose to work without pay within the home and raise children and tend house, we must demand that such care work be seen as work and refuse to be financially abused in either marriage or divorce because we see and know that such work has financial value. And we must protect our children from abuse, wherever that abuse may come from. And if they experience the misfortune of being attacked, we need to hear them and get them the help they need to move from victim to survivor. And women themselves must demand sexual autonomy. I teach college. The sexual double standard is in full force, with boys, men having social permission to explore their heterosexuality, and girls, women still often viciously being slut-bashed if they have casual sex outside of a relationship or have more than 2 to 4 sexual partners before settling into the conformity of long-term monogamy. Males in the college classroom still discuss the Madonna/whore dichotomy with vigor, and often in full agreement that there are different kinds of girls, good girls and bad girls, the kind you use and the kind you take home to your mother or family. Girls, women are not yet socially entitled to the same kinds or quantity of sexual activity or number of partners and degree of exploration to which boys and men are socially entitled. The sexual double standard plays heavily in today's gender divide, in general disrespect, in present-day rape myths, and in physical relationship violence or gendered assault. Until the sexual freedom and autonomy of girls and women is viewed in the same way as the sexual freedom and autonomy of boys and men, we cannot raise the public outrage for rape or woman battering, because in the minds of society, some women are the, air quotes, type of women who are, air quotes, asking for and, air quotes, deserve these horrific disrespects. The sexual double standard also affects the kind of men women choose to reward with their attentions. Because they feel unsafe, women still often demand a man who can protect them and make the decisions. The, air quotes, big strong man to whom she is not a physical equal, but who can make her feel safe from other men until or unless he becomes her assailant. And with the help of the media messages of pop culture, many women still look for a macho male, a man who is enacting the tough guy pose, a pretense against the violence and lack of communication that all too often becomes the long-term reality of male-female relationships. Our sexual tastes or proclivities, especially within normative heterosexuality, are in good measure social constructions that we receive from the culture around us and then internalize. Through every media and social outlet, women have been sold on, have been marketed the image of the big, strong, protective male, and our programmed desires for that image both undercut our own independence and autonomy and place us in harm's way with a man who has internalized his right of rule. Jackson Katz makes this point. Girls and women are not responsible for men's violence, but they too have an important role to play because the tough guys is attracted to men in part because they see many girls and women validating it. Girls and women have to show that they're looking for more in men than bad boy posturing, and in particular that they value men who reject the tough guys. G-U-I-S-E. Let me read that quote again. Girls and women are not responsible for men's violence, but they too have an important role to play because the tough guys, G-U-I-S-E, is attractive to men in part because they see many girls and women validating it. So men putting up a performance of toughness. They are attracted to doing that performance because they think it will help them get women. Girls and women have to show that they're looking for more in men than bad boy posturing, and in particular that they value men who reject this performance, right? The tough guys. That was Jackson Katz, K-A-T-Z. Women need to, again, rise up and declare themselves equally, fully human and worthy of all rights and fair treatment within and without relationships. And in the midst of our gratitude, in the midst of our gratitude as US-based first world women, that we do not from our culture suffer all of the same kinds of abuse as our sisters in other parts of the world. We need to come out of the denial about the kinds and quantities of abuses we do suffer, often simply because we are female, and stop blessing ourselves and genuflecting. In the US, we are not immune, even as overseas girls and women suffer gender abuse, assault, and discrimination here because they are girls and women. One of the problems with sustaining women's activism has been the fact that, rather than being ghettoized together in community with one another, women are, by and large, segregated from one another, from a majority of the other members of our subordinate group, by our placement within families. Each of us, straight or lesbian or bi or genderqueer or trans, is in relationship with members of the dominant group, with fathers and grandfathers and brothers and sons and grandsons and uncles and nephews and males-in-law. And that segregation from women's collectivities into mixed gender family structures creates qualitatively different problems for women's organizing into activist groups and movements than are experienced by other subordinate groups. In other words, this would not be true of LGBTQ people, but most racial, ethnic, religious minorities are growing up together, living together, living around each other in ways in which the mainstream society has facilitated and even mandated in lots of ways, like redlining and other things. But so there is this sharing of the experience of oppression, whereas women as individuals are within family units, right? And so not living in the settings of collectivity with other women. And the same would be true of many, most LGBTQ people, at least grow up in straight, cisgendered, heterosexual families and are not growing up together and often feel quite alone. So there's some, some complication there too. But in adulthood, many LGBTQ people find their way into community with each other, and women often still live out their lives within these families, within our families, right? So this is further complicated by cultural and religious memberships and identities that divide us from each other, that mitigate our sisterhood as a whole. Nevertheless, we must again come to see our common cause. This time our fight is not so much about our place in the spheres of education and employment, though we do not yet have full equality there either, but about our place in interpersonal relationships, in those very private familial and social relations with the males we love. We need to demand that we be treated with full fairness, respect, and equality within our relationships. As Kilbourne has argued, the changes have to be profound and global. We need to get involved, and this is a quote from her, we need to get involved in whatever way moves us to change the attitudes that run so deep in our culture and that affect each of us so deeply, whether we're conscious of it or not. It can be frightening to speak out, to stand up in this way, but as more and more people, men and women, find the courage to do this, the environment will change, because what's at stake for all of us is our ability to have authentic and freely chosen lives. Nothing less. That was Jean Kilbourne. I will finish with two more thoughts. Of his journalistic work for the safety and liberation of women worldwide, Nicholas Kristof, who was a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, has said, "I'm just outraged by the atrocities that I see. One way to fight warlords and rapists is with UN peacekeepers and large guns. Another way to fight them is with small notebooks and pens. That's what I do." And with this notebook, this electronic pen, mine, now I'm back to me. And with this notebook, this electronic pen, I remind us once more of these words by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And quoting Geneva Overholser, from whom some of this title is taken, and this quote I cite often in this book. "And of these, as long as rape is deemed unspeakable and is therefore not fully and honestly spoken of, the public outrage will be muted as well." So from that Geneva Overholser quote is why the subtitle of this book is Fully and Honestly Speaking of Gendered Assault. So again, she said, as long as rape is deemed unspeakable and is therefore not fully and honestly spoken of, the public outrage will be muted as well. Let us unmute the outrage. Whatever affects one of us affects us all. Thank you for listening through my reading of my concluding chapter of my book, I Trusted You, Fully and Honestly Speaking of gendered assault. It can be found online at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble. I invite you also to like, share, and subscribe this video or any of my videos, to please subscribe to my channel. I will note that I teach sociology at a college, and that I also have a spiritual counseling practice. My information is in the description below, and I can be reached for spiritual counseling sessions, everything being done virtually at present, but still nonetheless, I invite you to check into that. So, and appointments with me for spiritual counseling can be booked online through my websites, which are listed in the description. So thank you again, and I will read other sections of this book coming up. But think about what I've argued. I have argued essentially that it is ideological, that the differences between men and women are exaggerated. There are certainly reproductive differences, but those differences are not, women think, men feel, we both, if you cut us, we bleed. We all are human beings. And it is true that the distributions of height and intellect, even liking math and science, that the distributions overlap. If you took the two bell curves, the bell curve of men's heights and of women's heights, and laid them on transparencies atop each other, they would almost all of the scores would be overlapping, and it's just the very tails of the distribution where there's some slight amount more of taller men and some amount more of shorter women. And this is true for everything. We are equally human beings. There have been cultures in which there was no gender violence. It's in the beginning part of the book, and the documentation is in the footnotes, and they're available. But the work of Peggy Reeves Sende and Coltrane, I think I'm spacing on the author's first name, but their work is cited in those footnotes, and there's evidence that there have been cultures, pre-modern societies, where rape was essentially unknown, where gender violence was unknown, and where gender was done differently. Cultures that did it like we do, that did male dominance and female submission, and cultures that did female dominance and male submission, but also cultures in which both genders were dominant, or cultures in which both were submissive and nurturing. So, whatever that is, we're human beings. We're a thinking species. We are socialized into, we internalize our culture's beliefs about gender and sex roles, and we then enact them in our lives and in our relationships. And we are doing so to our own hurt. We can look at what others have done, we can study, we can think, we can change how we do this thing, we can be kind to each other, and we can make a difference. So we need to make a difference in regard to sexual assault, domestic violence of all kinds. Thank you so much for your attention and your time. And again, it's Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan saying good night.